All right. So we've got a couple of pieces of business to go through first, as we usually do. I'll share my screen and go to the agenda. Where's the share button? Here it is. Okay, can everyone see that? So what we're going to do today is, first off, I want to announce some incoming AU Core co-chairs. Very excited about that. Go through approval of our previous minutes, which should be nice and quick. Talk about the action from the previous meeting. If we've managed to get Ruben today, I'm not sure if he's going to be on the line, but he can give us an update around the 6th agenda concept proposal. And then get into talking about AUCDI, what's there, what the candidate is, what that means for AU Core, and drive that into an R1 scope discussion to start off with. I really want to go through a proposed way to split the branch for the current FHIR AUCDI, and then we'll look at our timing and agenda for the next meeting in January, where we're going to keep talking about AUCDI. So first off, I'm pretty happy to announce that we've got 3 new co-chairs joining us. So we've got Andrew Aubrey from EPIC, Michael Draheim from Oracle, and we've also got Tim Panaho coming in from ACT Health. And their term is starting in January. If any of you are on the line, if you can, come on camera and say hi. Surprise, I didn't let you know you'd have to do this. I'm not sure if anyone's here yet.
Hi.
Hi, Tim.
Sorry, I just got the last bit where it just jumped in. You're like, jump online, Tim, to say hi to everyone.
Yep, perfect. So that's Tim, so you can see his face.
Yep.
So when we go into connectathons and everyone, like who to contact, questions, and Tim will help you out.
Well, I'll try to.
Thanks, Tim. I'm not sure if we've got Andrew or Michael on the line.
This is Andrew. Hey, everyone.
Excellent. And you'll be seeing more of Andrew in tomorrow's session on must support, which is a not to be missed session at, I think, 2 p.m. On Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra time. All right, so let's get to approval of minutes of the previous meeting. So they've been sent out for feedback and review. Those have been adjusted as needed by participants, and there's no further outstanding review there. So I would like to put the call out to the group. Is someone happy to move for us to approve those minutes?
I will.
Okay, thanks, Dushi. So you're motioning to approve the minutes. Will anyone second that?
I second.
Thank you, Andrew. So let's go through the voting. The voting, for those of you who are new, we're going to go through and call for who is against the motion, and we'll ask you to put your hands up in the Zoom reactions for that. Then we'll see if anyone abstains and ask them to put their hand up, and we won't make everyone do it for the yeses. So first off, I'll call, is anyone against the motion to approve the minutes of the last 2 meetings? Okay. Does anyone want to abstain from voting on approval of the minutes of the last 2 meetings? Okay, that looks like we're good to approve. And so that's 44 yeses, I think, discounting the AI taking notes. But we'll check that against the Zoom attendee list, but I'm pretty sure that's 44. Okay, so those are approved. Ruben, are you on the line? Just check participants. No, it doesn't look like we've got room in here, so we can't give us an update on the sex and gender concepts proposal. So what we'll do is we'll make sure an email comes out to everyone and we'll talk about that in the next meeting on how that's going to come through. Can I just ask people to go on mute for the moment? Getting some background from someone.
I can see that. I didn't need you to tell me that.
Let's take a guess and mute someone. That seems to have worked. Okay, good. All right, so let's talk about the AUCDI. So in the last clinical design group meeting, which was the 5th of December, what was presented was a candidate AUCDI R1 set of data elements and groups, and subsequent to that, the clinical design people have made available to us a set of the definitions for that. So if you have gone through and read the material from the email I sent out, that will take you to this page, which has here what is the current candidate for AUCDI. So we've got the descriptions of what those data groups are and what the data elements are. And so what we want to do today is go through and talk about what's in AUCDI. I'd be interested to hear from anyone if there's anything surprising in there or unexpected or anything they're concerned about, and talk about some of what that initial mapping looks like into FHIR and what that means for what we want our scope to be for R1. We've been kind of waiting on this to come out so we could progress into narrowing down what from an R1 release will be the core concepts for digital health that we focus on. So I'll take that back to the mapping table, which has a summary view from that here. We've had a few people come in and comment and a few people look at that, which has been great. This isn't closed. I'll just say that although I asked for people to put in their mappings if they could before this meeting, I don't think that closes this off. I'd like us to continue to use this Confluence page and the chat in Zulip to go through and refine this, and we'll also talk about it in the next meeting. So what's overall being proposed from AUCDI are the following, I guess, data groups. We've got them under the heading data class. Is an adverse reaction risk summary, problem diagnosis summary, procedure completed, vaccination administered, medication use statement, some of the sex and gender concepts, tobacco smoking summary, encounter in regards to clinical context, some things that are being called vital signs and measurements, both of which are corresponding, I guess, to FHIR's profiles around vital signs, and a group they're calling biomarkers, which has lipids and some other, will look to be some key things to feed into a CVD risk. So I think I want to actually open that up there for comments on that from people who've seen this, who've looked at it, and to ask if, is there anything in there or is there anything missing that people were expecting to see?
I have a general sort of question. How does this relate to similar work that the US have done around a CDI?
You mean how does the AU clinical,
Yeah.
the AUCDI relate to US CDI?
Yeah. So is it being done with an awareness of, or with an expectation to fill a similar role, or because I was thinking if there's a depending upon how much focus there is on alignment, there might be an extra column talking about how it relates to USCDI stuff. But maybe that's not a thing of interest here. I'm ignorant enough of these things that I have no idea.
I think I have asked that the clinical design folks are on the line today to help us answer some questions, but I think some of the true, like why and how did you create the AUCDI? I think we want to be careful of bringing too much of that into the technical discussion. There's a clinical design group, which that material and how is that being developed and is being worked through there, and we're not trying to replicate that here. And I'm want us to, I guess, make sure we're taking these questions with a focus on, from a technical perspective and our needs. Is there anything here that we were kind of expecting to see to support our business and our use cases and implementation side of thing, or anything that's maybe in there that we didn't expect to see that is a surprise, that especially what the systems don't do, if that makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Stephen, you had your hand up next.
Yes, I've just put, hang on, let me lower my hand first. I've just put into the chat about some concern about allergy reaction risk, and in particularly the mapping to the FHIR allergy intolerance, where the definitions of allergy intolerance include more than just the risk. And I'm not sure, I've raised this concern previously at the AUCDI and also the clinical design group. It seems to be brushed aside, and my concern is that there is semantic mismatch between the allergy intolerance, the adverse reaction risk concept and the allergy intolerance concept in FHIR.
So, okay, so allergy intolerance in FHIR, because that's where I've opened it, is this risk of harmful or undesirable physiological response specific to an individual and associated with exposure to substance.
Well, if you look at it, it's at the beginning of the scope and usage is a record of clinical assessment of an allergy or intolerance, semicolon, a propensity, semicolon, or potential risk. So semantically, that concept is broader than the adverse reaction risk.
Which I realize we've only got a preview here, which is this. A risk of
exactly. So it is this adverse reaction risk itself is specifically about risk, while the allergy intolerance resource, the definition as it states, is broader than the risk itself. You look at this, this definition has multiple components. If you look at the first one, it's an assessment of allergy or intolerance. It's by itself a condition, right? And it says that there is the harmful or the adverse effect of allergy or intolerance, which is more than just the propensity or the risk.
We've got, okay, and I'll just check. Phil, are you also going to be have a response to the allergy intolerance, or a different question?
I can, but originally raised for a different question. I was answering your previous one. Do you want me to start with that adverse reaction?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure, and then we can decide when we want to move on. I guess in my thought process, there may be some semantic adjustments that we need to make, but practically, at least from my system's perspective, allergies and intolerances would all be documented in my terms in our allergy control, which is what we have mapped based on the US CDI FHIR standards to date. Doesn't mean it cannot change, to that adverse reaction FHIR piece. So I guess what I'm kind of thinking is the way we describe it may be an issue, but it ending up as an adverse reaction, that is practically where it would go, because we don't ask our clinicians to always define, I guess, the level between an intolerance and an adverse reaction. They have the option to put that information in as part of that single allergy control, but depending on what depending on why you're showing up at hospital, those kinds of things, how much time you have to investigate, you may not get to that level of detail, and just documenting it, the concept at the initial concept level is often what we see, rightly or wrongly, as far as clinical practice.
Well, I understand the argument. My point is not about the distinction between allergy and intolerance. My point is about the distinction of the definitions, where the adverse reaction risk itself is specifically about risk, where if you look at the allergy intolerance definition is containing of three components. First component is about the conditions, which is the allergy or intolerance. And then there is a propensity, and then there's a potential risk. So there are three components in that definition. And that definition has been debated upon, and I consulted with the two American allergy and immunology societies, and we agree to that definition, which means that the components are about the conditions, about the propensity, and about the risk or potential risk is more than just the definition that we have here, and the naming of the concept allergy intolerance risk versus the concept of allergy intolerance, which has three components in its definition.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is that the fire allergy intolerance is broader, but it does in fact subsume the AUCDI data class, so that it is still, therefore, in my mind, an appropriate mapping. The concept represented from the AUCDI is part of what this FHIR resource can do.
The mapping results in losses of semantics.
But it doesn't from AUCDI. What you're arguing about is whether AUCDI needs to be made broader, but the current proposal that's been given to the technical design group, as it stands, is satisfied by this resource.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's the AUCDI have obviously focused on the risk part of this, and that is able to be supported by the allergy intolerance resource, whether we choose to constrain it to that purpose within AU Core or not. That's perhaps something that we can consider, but there is no mismatch as such that I see. It's more of a constrained version upstream, which is quite sufficiently supported at the technical level.
If you don't consider semantic loss as a mismatch, then sure.
But I don't think it is semantic loss. If we take the semantics to be the AUCDI, which is what it is, that's what's defining what the clinical semantics are. We're not losing that by putting it into the FHIR resource.
We are mapping a narrower concept to a broader concept, and with the broader concept, it has three components, and two of the components are lost in that sense.
So I don't fully understand.
What is the other resource that we should use in FHIR then? What's the alternative suggestion?
Well, I mean, if you want to be true to the FHIR concepts, or true to the concept of allergy intolerance, then this concept shouldn't be narrowly constrained to allergy, to adverse reaction risk, and it should be called allergy or intolerance.
I think what you're asking for is actually the clinical group to actually be widening their definition more so than an issue in this group. But the thing is that they have actually narrowed their scope at the moment to the risk side of things, and they only have 2 or 3 elements associated with it. So they're probably not actually addressing, not that I fully understand the meaning of those other 2, but they're probably not addressing those other 2. They're only addressing the risk.
So I think what this suggests to me is, and I know you're a part of that group, Stephen, is that I think that needs to be worked through in the clinical design group.
Yeah, I will bring that issue up again at the clinical group discussion, but I just want to register that the concern is there.
Okay.
And I think we've got to be careful that FHIR is not dictating to the clinicians what they want. Unfortunately, we're in this situation where AU Core's kind of, for lack of a better word, bolted. We're ahead of where the CDG's at. And just because FHIR has gone through this, 10 years worth of discussion around definitions of things, we still need to be able to ensure that the clinicians are able to define their terms the way that they want to, and then us technicians try and ensure that we're actually mapping those down, those clinical concepts into our technical concepts.
I'm not asking the technical group to drive the clinical discussion. I'm saying that the broader conversation that has happened involving 2 professional society clinically, both are in immunology and also in allergy world, comes to that kind of conclusion. And I'm just questioning or I'm raising concern about we trying to narrow it down to the degree that it loses semantics.
Okay, I think we can move on from that. I hope. I'll just pause for anyone else to put their hand up to talk about this one. Otherwise, let's go to what Phil had to say about something else. Excellent. Phil.
Thanks, Danielle. To your question of, was there something that was missing here? My only other thought that I had as kind of a common one was some sort of documentation. I mean, it might sit under the observation kind of thought, but documentation that you might want to share. So thinking from the hospital perspective, exposing at least a discharge summary. Thinking from a GP perspective, thinking of exposing, maybe a shared care record. I don't know that we, or a procedure note too in the hospital. Those often are wanted by people outside the hospital, of the surgeon's procedure note. So that was kind of one that I was, I guess, a little bit surprised that we didn't have a spot here, just because I thought it would be relatively easy, maybe oversimplifying, a few of those kinds of concepts. Thanks.
Can I get then a view from the group on if that's something that is also shared by others? Because I think as a technical design group, we also want to provide meaningful feedback into that clinical design group around what our requirements are and how that's working.
Can I just comment, basically say there's nothing stopping us from having more data in our resources. I think technically, I'm assuming that's the case. So as we always do with these must supports and all those sorts of things, which is tomorrow's topic, but there is nothing stopping us for adding data beyond what is effectively a must support scenario.
I hope so, Heath.
Yeah.
So,
I haven't seen that documented anywhere.
What we're kind of saying, I guess, is this is the minimum, not so much a minimum data set, but
that's okay. That's a good point, and I'll talk to that actually. So it's not documented yet, and then we're working through that documentation. So what AUCDI will define is the clinical data. What they won't define is the necessary context, including things like patients themselves or practitioners or organizations or locations or some of the dates or any of that provenance stuff necessary to safely share that information. That is left up to the discretion of the technical design group to agree on what that needs to look like. That is a bit of an open-ended thing, and we need to work through where that is. Some of that I put in a bit more of a detailed mapping of what I think based on this that meant for us for some profiles, but it also means in terms of must support elements around real world identifiers or dates or linking off to encounters or relationships to other classes of data. Okay, let's go Andy next.
I was going to say the same thing as Heath in terms of I'm taking this as a set of requirements, and then there is a broader set of support that may be then provided. My only, I guess, challenge is going to be if this requirement, and I don't think we can immediately map these into must supports potentially, because the use case that the clinical group may be looking at may be completely valid, and we certainly would want to follow through with some support for that, but it may not represent the broader set of use cases. So I would hate to see that constraints applied from that one perspective actually then end up pushing people into AU base, because AU core is too constrained based upon that those set of requirements. I think that's the implication of what the CDI is meant to achieve. But as Heath also pointed out, I think we really need not to document exactly what's in there now, but actually the kind of the strategy and direction that this is supposed to be taking. The only thing I could find to describe AUCDI was kind of 4 bullet points on a website. And I think it would create more efficient conversations if those kind of that strategy of how it comes about and what we're going to do with it are actually made a lot more explicit.
In my view, I think that we need to, in AU core, whether it's R1 or not, and it might not be R1, ensure that we have a way to support all the data elements. That doesn't mean every system has to have implemented that resource, but I think that we need to have a way to exchange all the AUCDI data elements in the AU core FHIR AG. That is my expectation on us.
Right, and to recognise the fact that there will be other requirements that also drive how AU core is developed, and this is just one of those avenues of requirements collection and in a more formal kind of way from that clinical perspective, which is all good. But I think that, you know, we're not talking about a one-to-one mapping here, you know, bi-directional mapping, and so the completeness of what the clinical group want to agree upon is really something, as you said, we need to kind of keep the sanctity of that, I think, but it's also what we end up supporting might be a much broader set of needs.
Yes, I agree with that. Ruben?
Yeah, like I guess the big question is, does the CDG agree with that? This is a really important question as to what the alignment between AU core and AUCDI is, and it absolutely needs to be documented and endorsed by both groups. It'll be very easy for us to add additional elements, and it would help us if you start talking about modifier extensions and things like that for the CDG to understand the implications. So I think the key message for me is we need to understand what our lanes are and what we can reasonably do and what they expect us to do. The other general point I'd make about the CDG and AUCDI is it's really hard to answer some of these questions without understanding the use cases that AUCDI is actually targeting. I found it really bizarre that one of these data elements could have a status data sub-element, but another couldn't. And what's the rationale or reasoning behind that? So I think we as the TDG need to send something to the CDG seeking clarity and also perhaps the way we'd like to see things working, which I think is pretty much what Andy summarized a moment ago.
And Heath, you had your hand up.
Mine's on a separate topic, so as long as if you want to close out that one, or we're already closed out.
Well, I think Ruben, you've raised a few points on that we hadn't discussed on seeking clarification from the clinical design group. I'm just checking to see if we have anyone from the clinical design group on the line.
I mean, my only other comment on that topic would be that there is much more material coming. So whether we're going to have use cases, and again, this is the problem that we're in, where we're in front of the game from the CDG perspective. So I think there will be some clarity around some of this coming probably in January. Is that right, Daniel? I think that's when we're getting some draft for comments out around AUCDI.
Yeah, I expect that we'll have use case material available. Kylie's just coming on, and you can talk to timeframes and when we will get to see what kind of content.
Yeah, definitely. Like, take your point, everyone. We do want to get more documentation out, but we're kind of starting behind what you guys have started, where you guys have started. So yes, definitely we want to have more information out about the AUCDI, and that will in our first release for draft for comment in like first week of February, that will also include use cases there as well. We're trying to get the information out as quickly as we can. It's just, there's just a lot going on at the moment.
So can I ask my other question now?
Okay, yes.
Or make my other concern. So just on allergy reaction again, risk. I have an issue around the term substance, because I don't believe that directly maps to code. And maybe it's because of the issue that Stephen is talking about there, but even if we look at the code systems that are currently available, it's a very large code system of codes, intolerance codes. And not only does it include substances, but it also includes terms such as basically a set of findings, allergy to penicillin. Whereas we can actually put in a substance of penicillin there. So an allergy to penicillin is not a substance reaction, I think. I don't know, but hopefully you understand where I'm coming from. Like, there is another element under manifestation, which is substance. And I think there's a bit of confusion here around the AUCDI definitions, us mapping it to code versus the actual concept of substance under manifestation.
I agree. What I actually want to do, I don't know if we want to spend the next 20 minutes talking about it, because we probably will, or if we actually want to take this into Zulip and argue it out there asynchronously through the chat, going through what FHIR recommends and how we do that. It is a thing that I think we need to talk about, but I would prefer if we can hold off to go through the chat.fhir.org and have that through the community on what do we do about that. If people are okay with us like taking that asynchronous forum instead of taking up the rest of this meeting. Excellent. Do you want to post that then, Heath, as a topic? And I know I'll start responding to that on what I think and how we can go about it, and ask that the other people on the line also respond to that in the chat.fhir.org topic, and hopefully we can actually come to a position on that particular.
Is that under the one that you've already created? Is that where you want this conversation, or as a separate topic?
I think it can be a separate topic because, well, so the mapping itself is only meaningful for if it's just substance. So I think if we're talking about if all I have is the substance, if that's all I'm recording or supporting, noting that we've got those requirements from AUCDI, and I think that comes back to that broader question of is all we're going to support or say we are is substance name and not the finding. I would be loath to lose the finding. And I don't think we would want to restrict that in AU Core anyway. That's not its point. We need to be able to support the information from AUCDI, but not constrain down and somehow restrict to only ever sending what AUCDI currently has in it.
I think this is a really good one to see what vendors currently support, to get some feedback on whether they're actually representing their allergies as findings or substances. So, yeah, awesome.
I remember a comment from Graham Grieve where he was asked about the fact that it's got these two different things in allergy and intolerance. And the comment was basically that some systems use one, some systems use the other, some systems use both mixed together. And so the base resource is broad enough to allow people to do what's current practice. Now, that's not Australian current practice, that's current practice elsewhere. So it is possible we could narrow it down, but that would be very much a clinical question, very much a clinical thing.
Well, I disagree. I think it would be a what a systems implement thing.
I think it's both. I think the CDG probably needs to have this debate too, to actually see what do they want. Do they want the substance or do they want the finding? But then there's the what do the systems currently support?
Yeah. Or do they want both? Because very likely there's a range of systems that support one and a range of systems that support the other.
Michael, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Firstly, apologies for being a little bit late. Look, I put my hand down, then put it back up again because I think what we're and yes, it does. We need to get some clarification from the clinical group. You do need both. You know, I'll give you a quick example. I may have an adverse reaction to morphine. Does that mean I've got that I'm allergic to morphine? All right. So it really is. There's a cause and effect component, and if we're reporting on either one or the other or whatever else, I think this is where the clinical group have got to, you know. In my rudimentary terms, and happy to be shot down by clinicians, I would, I'm more interested in the allergies. All right, then you can get the causal information around, what the adverse reaction was. But I think, that's the bit I'm concerned about, is the fact that I think there hasn't been, from a use case perspective, an understanding of what you're actually trying to achieve when you see the different information, and that's the bit that worries me. So hence why I did put my hand down, was willing to get on the chat bit, but needed to say something because it is, I think people are thinking of one thing without thinking about what is the benefit, or what are we trying to achieve by, utilizing the information.
I think it might be good to have to organise even at this stage of content, Kylie, a Q&A session to go through the current draft of AUCDI and have Heather there and walk through those so that we can achieve an understanding about why is this worded this way, what does it really mean for us, so we can go forwards. So I'm going to take an action out of this meeting, and I'll work with you, Kylie, to see if we can schedule that for the group.
Sounds good.
All right, so we've got 20 minutes to go. I always suspected that, unfortunately, adverse reaction being an A and being first would suck us into talking about it for most of the first meeting, because that tends to be what happens. I want to move on then to a couple of other things and walk through those, noting we've not left this. So we're going to start talking about things in Zulip. If there are particular concerns, you want to raise them, let's start going and let's put these in the topics. I know there's a broad one here about implementing it and what does it look like and what its mapping is, but we might also take these into some other parts here. So let's go asynchronously into the Zulip chat on this. I'll work with Kylie to tee up a Q&A session for us. Which will be January, I rather suspect, given where we are now. And otherwise, looking at the mapping table, wherever that is, here it is. If you think there are potentially other profiles or elements, you can continue to review it at this table. And if you have broader questions on how does this work and how might something work in my system, take those into chat.fhir.org. That's where we're going to have all those conversations. So I'm going to navigate away from this and we're going to go to, let's talk about our scope. So you may have noticed that the build, the continuous integration build of AU Core is massive. It's massive because of how AU Core started being drafted. And it started being drafted 2 years ago, I think. And some of that has been a migration from other FHIR IGs. So it's got a lot of content that started in AU Base itself and got pulled over into AU Core as it migrated out of AU Base. It's got content from the primary care data quality FHIR IG, from the National Child Health Digital Collaborative IG. Some of it's come from the agency IGs. Some of it's come from, I think, the MyScript FHIR IG. And others have been things that have come in or been asked for to support other people who are developing and trying to test out what would something look like. So that's supporting some of the smart apps and OAuth things, and also some contents in there that has come through the work that Heath, Andy and Angus did on the Genie and Sonic FHIR IG around a draft pregnancy status profile. So where we started from is this whole huge set of all the things that didn't belong in any other HL7AU FHIR IG. And it's bloated. It is absolutely not all R1 scope, and it's probably some of those things will never actually be in AU Core. So now that we've got the AUCDI, we've also had our voting on what our priorities are through GitHub, and we've put those also in the Confluence. We can go through and work through some scoping for what comes out in R1. I've proposed some criteria here on what's definitely in, what's maybe in, which is pretty big, and then what's in R2. And to my mind, what's definitely in R1 are the things that are both in AUCDI and the things that have high community interest and that we can actually do within the time frame. That last one's probably less of an end, but it's still there, maybe supported by US Core IPS IPA. The maybe is if it's in AUCDI or we were quite interested in it and we can do it in time. So I put in a rough analysis looking at profiles and topics on what that looks like for us. If people have had a chance to have a look, that's great. If not, that material is here. Please have a look at it. There's a much more detailed comparison on this page, looking at what our scope drivers are, being AUCDI, and our use cases of interest to the community, which have been done through the Sparked workshops when we launched this, where we've done our voting, and also looking at how we relate to our international and other national IGs. And what that comes down to is maybe some mapping across here for what all this content might look like. This is just something that myself and Dushi have put together around how we think this potentially maps, where things don't exist and where things are very unlikely to be in R1 or otherwise. So it's not a locked in stone thing. It's a starting point that we've put together. So let's have a look at it. So I think what we've got here is what comes into scope, looking at what those initial mappings are, is patient and encounter profiles, organization, procedure, practitioner role, immunization profile for the vaccines administered, having practitioner profile. There's some of the vital signs profiles that map to AUCDI elements, but not all of them do. There's a larger set that was sitting in the AU Core draft scope. Ruben, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Sorry, I'm jumping back a little bit, and that's only because I've got to leave in about 5 minutes. I would suggest that pronoun, sex assigned at birth, and gender identity should be in the definitely in R1 because they are definitely in AUCDI.
And that's not my criteria for R1 at the moment. I don't, because I think we have to get to AUCDI and in AUCOR eventually, but I don't know if we can always say that will be R1. We might have to hold things over to R2 if we can't get agreement on them in time.
Sorry, does that mean that not everything in AUCDI is going to be in AU Core?
It will be in AU Core, but it might not be in R1. It might be in R2.
Okay, so R1 of AU Core isn't aligned with R1 of AUCDI from a content perspective.
It is, some of those are sitting in the maybe because they are not discussions we've had as a group on if we're going to commit to putting them in R1 yet. And I think we should discuss them. Yep.
Yeah, look, that's news to me. I'd always assumed that everything that was R1 AUCDI would be R1 AU Core because that's how it works in the US. So thanks for clarifying that point. Please continue.
Ruben, the US CDI and FHIR Core, the relationship is a 12 months leapfrogging type of relationship. They don't have this concept of R1, R2 per se. So you always find that by July or sorry, by September of each year, the US CDI will have something that is more than the US FHIR Core. And then by after January the next year, the AU Core might be equivalent to or might be a bit more than the US CDI. So the interesting question is: are we following the US model, or how is our sort of a development cycle sort of aligned? So R1 to R2, is it an annual cycle, or is it a biennial cycle or triennial cycle?
I can answer that.
Sorry, just one point there, Stephen, because I don't think you understood what I was saying. There is an expectation that a version of US Core satisfies the requirements for a version of US CDI. And that was my expectation for AU Core and AU CDI as well, that for a particular version of Core, you can say that it satisfies requirements of a particular version of AU CDI.
And I'm not disagreeing with, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that the relationship has to be sort of governed by the cycle period. As to in the US, my understanding is a 12-month cycle. Are we looking at a sort of 12-month cycle here, or are we looking at longer?
There is a 12-month cycle here. I have spoken to the Sparked people and government and otherwise around here I have floated with them and it's been accepted that depending on what comes in AUCDI, we may or may not be able to fully implement all of that in R1. And we might not, depending on what gets brought up. But that my expectation is that, yes, a version of AU Core would indeed be able to say it implements this version of AUCDI. But I do not know if we can get to that in R1 and commit to that in the timeframes. And I think that is something for us to work through if we can do that. Andy?
Yeah, I just had I guess a comment on the reference to interest and to focus around things that have recognized interest. And I would like to see that we call out the requirements of organizations that are actually implementing and give them a higher precedence than those that have an interest but are actually not building stuff, because there's a lot of interesting topics in FHIR and things that would be interesting to do a kind of an academic exercise of putting this into AU Core. But I think we do need to recognize where there are actual implementations being created, IGs being created, and there is something that we can point to and go, this is in support of this. And I think that would encourage people to A, expose their implementation guides, and B, give greater clarity around the importance of these on a national basis, because I do fear that we're in a height of expectation and excitement around the wonderful new world of FHIR for many, and that doesn't necessarily mean that interest is directly mapped to, and we're ready to use this now.
Mm-hmm. Phil?
Yeah, I guess in my head, I can hear where you're coming, Andy, but I guess what I'm thinking in my, well, I don't have disagreement there, but I do get a little bit worried in that until we really see the architecture for things like, and I'm making an assumption here, the international patient summary and e-requesting as being the first use cases, it's really hard to then go and say, is the work we're doing here in AU Core and what we need for R1 going to support those use cases? Because some of that fundamental information around those two scenarios of how we expect it to work and what information different systems will have to share with each other to make it work is difficult, because there are several different models that exist around the world and even here in Australia. And so I agree that people doing some of the work, we should focus on some of those. But until we get that, I think it's hard for everybody to get up to speed and understand and go, hey, is that a major issue with their workflow or their clinician base that they represent?
Thanks, Phil. Any other comments on scoping at this stage? Because I want us to have I think the criteria for being definitely in R1 is fairly strict, and there's a lot more that's in the maybe. Being what's definitely in is part of AUCDI and was indicated from the technical design group members as being the highest priority things that they wanted. That being said, if there are things in here that we don't think are part of that, which I would be surprised by, then we can bring that up. We've got the things really around allergy intolerance procedure, immunization, organization, encounters, practitioner, and so forth. Heath, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so again, this is a personal opinion, but I think there's a couple of issues here in the definitely in scope, and one is around the procedure, because I think, and it might come back to definitions. I think we think about what we're trying to cover, and again, this is a distinction between primary care and probably hospital systems, but certainly from a primary care perspective, there's the concept of medical history, where they bundle together basically history of procedures as well as history of conditions and current conditions and all those sorts of things together. So the idea of procedure is going to be very difficult, as it is in the My Health record, to actually distinguish a procedure from a condition the way that primary care systems currently, if I understand it correctly, store that information.
I'll flip that back to you. Are you suggesting that we don't have an AU Core procedure profile in R1?
In R1? No, I don't think that we should.
And so what profile would we use for that concept you've just talked about?
Condition.
Okay. So we would send history of medical history, whether it's including undifferentiated, whether it's conditions or procedures, through a condition
Yeah, and that may be
profile.
contentious, and I may be, semantically incorrect, but I think we got to think about the simplicity of vendors implementing this. And again, I suspect that the hospital systems do this much better and would be able to support procedures and those sorts of things. But I think from a primary care perspective, it's difficult. The other one I've got is around medication statement, and
which is in the maybe at the moment.
Okay, all right. So, yep, okay, I'll see you've got the / medication request. So again, I think we need to have a really good discussion technically around whether these AUCDI actually mean a medication statement, which I kind of consider more around medication reviews, more so than the idea of a medication list, which is usually derived from a list of prescriptions that I have, or a prescription history, for lack of a better word. So,
okay.
Two comments from me.
Okay. So let's, I think both of those are answered by us taking that, going through the AUCDI mapping exercise basically and coming to agreement on how those elements are, those AUCDI data elements are mapped. And once we do, then that tells us if it's in scope or not. Would you agree, Heath?
Can you clarify the difference between the darker yellow and the paler yellow?
Yeah, I thought the darker yellow are the ones that are in, the darker yellow are the ones that are potentially AUCDI. So these are in these ones for the maybe and scope. We had some differences of opinion between what was a high community interest and what was in AUCDI. And when I was doing the table, I was flagging to myself, like AU Core waist circumference is in AUCDI, but it may or may not be a high priority for the community. So it's in the maybes for us to work through.
That's a really nice separation. Maybe mention it somewhere on the page so we can tell.
Yeah, that's a good idea. The darker yellow are the ones that are closer to being in, but we need to argue about these ones first. So we're coming up to time. We've got a question in the chat. Will Core R1 have focus on directory service resources such as practitioner role? That's in the definitely in, by the way. Most of the provider directory have, because they're at organization practitioner role, are in the definitely in. Some are in the maybes. And that will be for us to work through if they're a high enough priority for the group to actually feed into the consensus discussions, get agreement and test those out in our timeframes. We can't do everything. I don't think there is any chance of us doing all of the definitely and the maybes in an R1 timeframe. We're going to have to make some decisions on what gets held over because there just isn't enough to do everything in an R1 timeframe. And then we are going through yearly cycles, both for AUCDI and for AU Core. So we will continue to work on what goes in AU Core at the, I'm going to stop screen sharing here. I want us to, I haven't organised it yet. When we get too closer to the end of AU Core and we're going through that ballot cycle and finalising that, to organise a session for us to come together and do planning on what is our priority for the following year. What do we want to work on? Noting we still have AUCDI content that will be coming. So that will be in advance and we'll know what some of that is coming. Thanks, Ruben. And I agree. So out of this, I'll make the recording available. We'll have some notes. I'd like people to comment on the page and also start providing your feedback, especially you, Heath. You've got alternative mapping suggestions. That's brilliant. We want to take those into Zulip and comment on the page so we can work through those. And I ask that people who have a stake in this around which profiles we're actually going to implement, participate in that, because that's the only way we're actually going to get to a result. And don't forget about tomorrow where we talk about my support. That's the end of my spiel, Richard.
Just a question on what counts as being in R1. Do we have a thing of saying that stuff will be published there and it will have a certain FMM level and things like that? So that
not
I mean,
AU
yeah.
base. We won't do what AU base does. It will only be in the AU core R1. If it's in R1, it is going through a full cycle through to ballot for standard for trial use. How AU base is handled, which is different to every other FHIR AG, won't be something we apply. Like we don't apply it to provider directory either.
Okay, so that would suggest everything is going to have an FMM level of what, 1 or 2? 2. Okay.
2 is the aim. We're going to go through connectathons and validation piloting. If we can't go through to have the intention is to have a standard for trial use. And to do that, we have to have sufficient validation and implementation feedback on these profiles to be confident that that's what we can achieve.
Right. So there might be some things. So theoretically, some of the things could go through and just at the end of the time frame, they're only at FMM level 1 because they haven't had enough of the extra things to get to 2, but they'd still in effect be part of R1.
I don't think they would be.
We'd wind up dropping them out of R1 and saying they're part of R2 if we can't get them to 2.
The difference, one of the differences between AU base and the other FHIR AGs is must support and capability statements. There are no obligator implementations on AU base, which allows you this. Is it really that important or not? It's kind of regardless of FMM, be it 1 or 2, the must supports apply, which means practically we're placing those obligations on vendors. Either we've reached a level of consensus that that's actually what we agree it does, which means it's in R1, or we don't think that we have sufficient consensus to place those obligations, in which case I don't think it's in.
Thank you.
Righto, thanks everyone for your time today. I realise we're coming to December. The next meeting, they're in the HL7AU FHIR calendar, is January. And it is, I'll send out the meeting invites soon. For that, it's January 11th is our first for those people who are super eager. And then it is January 25th. But yeah, so there'll be comms coming out from us, and otherwise let's continue the conversation through chat.fire.org and through the Confluence so we can work through what AUCDI resource profiles we should be supporting. Okay, if there's no further questions, let's end it there.
Merry Christmas all.
Have a great break, everybody.
Merry Christmas all.
Cheers, have a good one.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Bye.